And then he says to the provost, "What news?" And the provost says, "I told you. He has sent me and told me to hurry up and follow through on my orders to kill Claudio and Barnardine." And he says that it's strange because he hasn't done this before. He's trusted the provost up to this point to just do what he's told. And so the Duke asks to hear the actual letter. And the letter says, "Whatsoever you may hear to the contrary, let Claudio be executed by 4 of the clock, and in the afternoon Barnardine. For my better satisfaction, let me have Claudio's head sent me by 5. Let this be duly performed, with a thought that more depends on it than we must yet deliver. Thus fail not to do your office, and you will answer it at your peril." So basically he said he brings Claudio's death forward by a few hours and asks that he also be sent the head, and then threatens the provost and says, "If you don't do this, you're going to be punished." So the Duke responds to this by saying, "Who's Barnardine?" And the provost replies, "Well, he's been a prisoner here for 9 years." The Duke says, "Oh, 9 years? Why hasn't the Duke either had him executed or pardoned?" They didn't believe in life imprisonment at this time. It was either death, and that would happen quite quickly, or you do a small service of imprisonment and get whipped and then get released, which is what's the plan for Pompey until he became the executioner. And the provost says, "Look, we weren't really sure that he was guilty, but now, since Angelo became the deputy, we became certain that he is guilty, and so we brought him to Angelo's attention." And the Duke says, "Oh, are you sure he's guilty?" And the provost says, "Yeah, it's definite now, he's admitted to it." And the Duke says, "What kind of person is he?" And the provost responds, basically, he's useless. He's careless, he's reckless, he's fearless. He doesn't care that he's going to die. Despite the fact that he is the person who really should be most thinking about religion and thinking about life after death, because he's such a horrible person. So don't forget, the Duke is still dressed as a friar. So he says, "I should go and talk to him." And the provost responds by saying, "No, there's no use. He's not going to listen to you." So he says, "Look, he's had the liberty of the prison. He could have escaped, but he's too drunk to escape." And then he says, we keep waking him up and telling him that he's going to be executed today, but he doesn't get upset at all. He doesn't care about dying." And so the Duke says, "Oh, we'll talk about that in a minute, but first, you look like an honest man." And he says, "So I'm going to ask you to do something." He says, "Claudio, whom you have warrant to execute, is no greater forfeit to the law than Angelo, who had sentenced him." So Claudio and Angelo are equally guilty. That's actually quite an ambiguous statement, because it could mean that both Angelo and Claudio are innocent, or it could mean that both Claudio and Angelo are guilty. So he's not really saying anything too controversial there. And then he asks for 4 days respite. So he says, "Please don't kill Claudio for 4 days." And the provost just clarifies what he's asking for, and Duke says to delay death for 4 days. And the provost says, "If I don't deliver Claudio's head within an hour, then I am going to be sentenced to death as well." And then the Duke says something very interesting. He says, "By the vow of mine order, I warrant you." So he's using his holy vows as a friar to say that he will protect and look after the provost. But of course, he's not actually a friar, so it's really quite an interesting, morally ambiguous moment for the Duke. So he says, "Trust me, execute Barnardine this morning and take Barnardine's head." So this is the head trick, where we switch Barnardine's head for Claudio's head. Provost says, "No, Angelo will know." And Death says, "Nah, just cut off Barnardine's hair and beard, and they'll look the same." And then he says again, he reinforces, "If anything fall to you upon this," so if you're going to get in trouble for this, "by the saint whom I profess," so again he's swearing by his holy vows, "I will plead against it with my life. I'll protect you with my life. I will take your place and say it's my fault." So once again, we've got that moral ambiguity that the Duke is using his disguise as a friar in order to convince people to do things that he wants them to do. The provost responds to this by saying that it's against his oath, that he's sworn to be loyal and true, and he can't break that. So we can see again this insight into the provost's personality, that unlike Angelo, he's not prepared to break his vows. And the Duke just double checks, oh, are you sworn to the Duke or sworn to Angelo? And Provost says, I'm sworn to the Duke. And the Duke says, so if the Duke says it's okay for you to not kill Claudio, you'll be okay with it? And the Provost says, yeah, what are the chances of that? And the Duke says, oh, it's certain, it's absolutely certain. And he says, since neither my coat, integrity, nor persuasion can with ease attempt you. So what he's saying is that the Provost, unlike Mariana and Isabella, isn't convinced just by his holy appearance. So his coat, his dress of being a friar, the integrity of his vows, and then the persuasive language that he uses. So we can see straight away that the Provost isn't falling for the fact that he's a friar in the same way that Mariana and Isabella did. So then he says, hey, look, here is the handwriting and the seal of the Duke. You recognise it, I'm sure, and you've seen the seal before. So he's pulled out a letter that's sealed from the Duke. So he doesn't open it during this scene, so we can assume that he just happens to have a letter on him that he hasn't sent yet, and that he's just sort of waving it under the Provost's nose, and that he'll send a letter from the Duke when he isn't dressed as a friar. And the Provost says, yes, that is his handwriting. And then the Duke says, you can read this letter later, but within 2 days the Duke will be here, so the Duke will arrive in less than 2 days. This is a thing that Angelo knows not, for he this very day receives letters of strange tenor, perchance of the Duke's death, perchance entering into some monastery, but by chance nothing of what is writ. So he's saying, Angelo has no idea that the Duke is coming back. I've sent him a really weird random letter with false information in it. And then he says, look, the unfolding star calls up the shepherd. So that's a biblical allusion. So in the Bible, the unfolding star calls to the shepherd to release his flock. So what the Duke is saying here is that it's time for the Provost to release Claudio. And he says, put not yourself into amazement how these things should be. Don't worry about how this happened. All difficulties are but easy when they are known. I'm going to explain it to you and then it will make sense. Call your executioner and off with Barnardine's head. Get Barnardine's head. I shall give him a present shrift and advise him for a better place. So he's saying that he's going to give Barnardine his last rites so that Barnardine will go to heaven. So again, he's using his position as a friar. Yet you are amazed, but this shall absolutely resolve you. So he's referring to the letter. You still don't really believe me, you're amazed, but when you read this letter, you'll understand. And then come away, it's almost clear dawn, better get a move on. And that's the end of the scene.